Are you ready for your change?
Yes.
There's this great meme, I've said this before, but it feels so poignant at this moment. There's this meme where someone's standing in front of a crowd and he says, "Who wants change?" And everyone screams and raises their hands. "Who wants to change?" Right? So what we're working with today, what we're being with today is the change that each of us has the opportunity to make from the inside out so that we can make a profound difference on this planet. Because there's never been a moment where it's been needed more than right now.
Yes.
And as I said in the beginning, I can say that at any moment because it's always the truth. And at this moment, there's plenty of evidence to show how that is a true statement. And so the talk, as I said in the beginning, is gratitude and spiritual activism. So I want to start with, what do we usually think of when we think of activism? What do you usually think of?
Marching.
Marching. What else?
Protesting.
Protesting.
Preaching.
Preaching. What else? Activists. Anger. Right. How many of us, I'm going to include myself in this, because I remember moving to San Francisco in the 90s and we were out there protesting, angry. And I remember the first time I was at a protest when I watched someone pick up a chair and throw it through a window and throw fire in it, and the crowd went crazy. And I was like, I don't think this is my moment. I think maybe I want to have a little different idea about how to be an activist in this world. Because as Kama Chodron's reading so beautifully said, I can't listen to that reading without crying. And I can't listen to that song without crying. Because it brings up a really deep and profound truth that every single moment we have a decision to make, whether we're going to keep our hearts open or close our hearts off. Whether we are going to stand against something or stand for something, stand in something, stand in a greater reality than the perceived insanity happening in the world. I've had a profound awakening to a new way of looking at what's happening in our world. And that new way of looking at it is looking at not through the lens of rightness and wrongness and goodness and badness and what I need to get out there and change, but an opportunity to recognize that in the midst of what's happening in our world, we get to be the light.
Yes.
And what I love about the reading in Kama Chodron is she talks about every single moment being the opportunity a zillion times where I get to recognize that place where I seek revenge. Now, most of us in this room probably aren't like, I'm going to seek revenge. But that place gets touched. We all know what I mean, right?
Yes.
And it might show up with a "how dare you," or "what?" When it gets touched, it's mine. And that's where the change is wanting to happen. I've had zillions of opportunities in the last 24 hours to notice where I got a little tightness. Nietzsche says, within every judgment is its seed for revenge, or a seed of revenge. So as soon as I go into a judgment, I have automatically set up this cycle of revenge. So we're at a profound moment in our state, in our country, and we have an opportunity on Tuesday, if you haven't voted already. And again, I want to be really clear, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you who to vote for, because I don't think that's what this country was founded on. What I want to invite, though, is this is a profound moment for you to check in with yourself and ask some simple questions. Which button do I push? I don't know if do we have the push ones? I don't remember what we have. That's going to bring more peace into the world and more opportunity for us to wake up to a new reality of oneness. Now, that may not really happen politically. As my friend says, politics is the lowest form of consciousness. Now, the reason is because it's automatically set up as an us and them, a division, a good and bad. I'm right, you're wrong, and let me tell you why. I'm going to stand in my position. So what I want to invite, for those of us who feel called to vote on Tuesday, is can you be love in that ballot box? That's what will make a profound difference. And I want to tell a story, and it was a moment that changed my life, and it was during the last election, 2016, and we had a choice for president between two candidates. And I was walking to my little ballot, in San Francisco, the ballot, whatever you call it, the polling places are in people's garages, which is pretty cool, a lot of them, right? So I'm standing in line, and a taxi pulls up, and someone opens the door, and this woman who appeared to be in her 80s or 90s, African American, with her walker, all dressed up for church. It was so beautiful. And she was like, I'm going to that ballot box.
Yes.
And I remember thinking at that moment, she, in her lifetime, was going to have the opportunity to see the first African American president and the first female president, and look at her. My guess is she'd probably rather be resting. But there was something within her that knew it was her divine responsibility to be there. And I remember breaking down into tears because of that moment. Now, what I expected and what many of us expected didn't come to pass. So we can go into judgment. We can go into how did this happen? We can go into fear. We can go into how do I fight for equality? But the invitation here is to come at it from a very different place. And as more and more of us are dedicated to being spiritual activists, and what that means is, very simply, I will be the presence of God in the midst of anything I'm standing for. So we're each called in our own unique way to be activists in this world, to take political action or not. In all fairness, we get to decide. My invitation for us is that we can be the love in the midst of this world. And I just want to name that there's some really insane things happening in the world. And I want to talk very clearly about what I see as the root of this insanity through the lens of compassion. There's one word, and it's fear. Jesus the Christ said, forgive them for they know not what they do. And I have taken that into a little bit different awareness of what he was saying, and that is forgive them for they know not who they are. So I have caused harm in my own life and in the lives of the people around me, very simply because I forgot the truth of who and what I was. And because I forgot who I was, I couldn't possibly see the truth of who you are. So you became the other. And as soon as someone or some group of people become the other, all sorts of insanity gets to happen. Because of the fear that gets created by seeing someone or a group of people as the other. So when we have the opportunity of noticing a place where we might feel stuck or angry or hurt, when we move beyond the idea that there's any such thing as a negative emotion, because a lot of times what we've been deeply programmed to believe is that this doesn't feel so good, I'm going to label it as negative and I'm going to figure out a plan to get rid of it. That paradigm can only take us so far. Because we're in an emerging new paradigm where we recognize the question, what if? What if it was all useful for my own transformation? Someone went to a great master once and said, how do I learn to forgive others? And she said, there are no others. I cannot possibly experience oneness in the world until I have integrated oneness within myself. And I'm going to share exactly what I mean by integrating oneness within myself. When I believe that there's a spiritual part of me and a human part of me, I might be looking at myself through the lens of duality. Integration would be, what if it was all useful for my own awakening? What if That moment when someone says something and I get my feelings hurt and I go into reaction and I notice I went into reaction and I lean into that and say, no, I am done with that. I am not going to defend. I'm not going to retaliate. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to allow it to happen within me. And I'm going to recognize that it's not the truth of who and what I am. It's an opportunity for me to break my heart open. We all have heartbreaking stories. Mm-hmm. The question is, are we going to allow that to break our hearts open? Or are we going to allow it to build a deeper and a bigger barricade? Mm-hmm. Part of this process for me is recognizing that each of us fundamentally are spiritual beings, and we have this other place. Now, I'm not saying, it's going to sound like I'm maybe not being really clear, because here I am saying there's different parts of us. Language is really limited. Essentially, we're whole and perfect. We come into this world and we start to get taught all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And I want to be really clear about something, because I think it's my responsibility as a white man to speak to this. I grew up in Indiana in the 1970s, and I was deeply programmed to be racist. Mm-hmm. It was all around me. Mm-hmm. I was taught that people were different because of the color of their skin, and I took some of that into my unconscious and my subconscious. It's not possible to not do that. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes, yes.
And so it's not going to serve me to stand here and say, I don't have any of that. Thank you, Helen, for laughing. The way we transform the world is we transform ourselves. Yes. Lao Tzu said the greatest gift I can offer the world is that of my own transformation. Until I acknowledge my unconscious biases, they're going to be running the show. And I can have as many strategies as I want to tell you that's not true, but they're running the show.
Yes, yes.
So in my work in conscious recovery, in my addiction work, I recognize that shame is one of the deep causes of addictive behavior. Shame is a deep cause of racism and every other kind of ism that we have, sexism, homophobia. It's all based in fear, based in shame. There's something wrong with me. I'm going to defend that. And the easiest way to do that is make something wrong with you so you can be the enemy. And then I get to stand here in my righteousness and tell you how I'm right and what's wrong with you. And then because collectively we have this shame, we find ourselves living in victim martyr consciousness. I'm broken. We're broken. We need a savior.
Yes.
And here's the thing, when we're living in that consciousness, someone might believe that Savior is our president.
Yes. Yes.
You hear it?
Yes.
Now here's the good news. When I can see that in my own life, I can have compassion for someone else in their life.
Yes.
And in the midst of that, I can say, I understand how you would feel that way. It doesn't mean I'm going to say it's right or wrong. It means that I have an opportunity to make a profound difference when I'm not in the place of the enemy. Right? Because what we know, and it's only true 100% of the time. It's true in physics. It's true in every aspect of our existence. What we resist persists. Yes. And we know that. And we also know now that the observer has a profound effect. Now, mystics have been saying that for 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, maybe I don't know how many thousands of years. And scientists are saying, oh, wow, look. When I look at you in a certain way, it has an effect. It actually changes not only our relationship, it actually changes matter.
Yes.
So there are endless possibilities in every single moment. There are endless possibilities right now in the shift that's happening on our planet. There are endless possibilities, and when we resist, we're going to create that possibility. I actually think that's why Donald Trump is president. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you hear what I'm saying?
Yes.
The more we resisted, the more powerful he got.
Yes. Yes.
Now, I did say I wasn't going to talk about particular candidates. But I'm standing on the shoulders of Michael Beckwith, because he one Sunday when I was there just went for it. And he was like, we are living with a leader that's literally insane.
Yes.
And he's a representation of what is insane about each of us when we believe in the enemy.
Yes.
And the work happens in this moment. The work happens right now. I had an opportunity yesterday to hear some stuff that was hard for me, and I noticed that I wanted to make it about them. And I was like, oh, there it is. Here I am doing it. It's really painful. What I have learned to do is pause. And what I have learned to do is recognize that this is something being touched within me, not because something's wrong here, but because something is healing, that it's not going to heal unless I allow it to. Because I can go right into judgment, and then I can collect a few people in the community to agree with me, and then we can build a coalition. And that happens individually, it happens in this community, it happens in our city, it happens in our state and in our country, and it's time for a change. And the change happens right now with each of us being willing to sit with what's really happening here. We did a workshop about a year ago, I think, with Martha Beck. She's wonderful. She's the Unity Minister. And she had this great process, and I loved it. She said, this is what I do when someone has some criticism. I think you're right about that. Let me look at how that's true. Now maybe inside she's like, oh. So that's what I try to start with. I try to start with, oh wow, I'm noticing this activation, and I'm noticing because of this, there's a part of me that wants to defend and go into rightness and wrongness in the story, and then there's revenge, because it's always the solution when I believe this to be true. And instead I sit with it and I say, let me feel what's really happening, because it's not what's happening right now. This is an old wound. Right? It's an old wound for people don't see me, people don't hear me, I don't feel supported. It's not what's happening right now. When I allow that in and I sit with it and I say, I wonder in what ways that's true. I wonder in what ways this is love showing up for me. I wonder in what ways I can notice that this has been a reoccurring theme for the last 53 years of my life. And the common denominator is me. And that's the good news, because that's what I can begin to shift. And what I want to close with is, I had a member, okay, there's a couple pieces to this. One, I have the honor of being ordained by Reverend Michael Beckwith on the stage at Agape, and he gives every person a word, and then he says a few words. And it comes from a very deeply intuitive place. So I was last, because my last name's Woodward. I'm used to that. That's been my life. Unless there's a zonker or someone in the room, I'm usually last. So I was standing there and I was like, oh, I like that word. Why isn't it mine? And I was just noticing. I want authentic. I want courageous. I want loving. And so he came to me, and I was last, and he comes up and he says, you are a visionary. And I remember feeling it and taking it in. But what he said next is the important part, because as Michael says, a good day for the ego, or a bad day for the ego is a good day for the soul. So my ego liked being a visionary. Ooh, yeah, that feels good, I like it. But what he said next was the important thing, and he said, and as a visionary, this is what you're going to need to learn to do. You're going to duck compliments and criticisms in the exact same way. Okay, that's quite a calling. Thank you. I want to say thank you so much for that. And that has been the case. Right? That has been the case. I get to stand and people get to come and tell me what they liked or didn't, or why did I say it that way, or why are the chairs this color, or can we get a different lighter, or who should I talk to about the toilet paper in the bathroom, because I don't really like it. And it goes deeper. It goes a little deeper. I know, because we are an intentional, authentic, spiritual community, stuff is going to get touched in this room. Stuff is going to get touched because we're holding a space for a very deep transformation. And when the stuff gets touched, I get to see it as the transformation that's happening. And when we're willing to have it happen internally, we can then allow it for others. Pema Chodron again says, compassion is not a relationship, between the healer and the wounded, but between two equals. Only when I know my own darkness well can I be present with the darkness of another. And I add to that, only when I know my own light well can I be present with the light in another. So what I intended to close with is what I really close with. Someone said to me, this was the criticism, and said to me, why are we talking so much about the buttons and the personality and the ego and letting go of the stories and the unconscious? Why aren't we just talking about being in the presence of God? That's all I want to hear. We are God. And I really understand that. Because that's the ultimate truth. Right? So I understand his request. Because he has a desire to experience that and wants to be in a community that experiences it. But here's the thing. All of the rest of that is God too. And when I divide and say God is only that really feel-good stuff, like the Marian sings, or when I'm in meditation and it feels really warm and fuzzy and wonderful and I feel the oneness, it's also God when I'm in meditation and I experience my own judgment, and I experience my own resistance, and I experience my own closing off, because it's an opportunity. So what if it's all God? Yes. What if it's all God and all good, not good with an opposite? So as we move into this weekend and this Tuesday, as we are voting our conscience, my invitation is to look at how it's possible that it's all God, and that we get to make a choice in the midst of that of being the change agents in the world. More love, more compassion. My dad asked me who my favorite president was. This was before Obama, I wanted to say. And I said Jimmy Carter. He literally fell on the floor. We have a little different political views. And he said, why? He was terrible. And I said, there is not a man. Now again, pre-Obama, I want to keep prefacing that. This was 12 years ago, probably, we had this conversation. I said, he was a man who stood for peace more than any other president. And he said, I can't deny you that. Wow. And that's, to me, all it is. In the end, as Pema Chodron says, are we going to go to war, or are we going to stand as peace? Are we going to be the aggression in the world, or are we going to be the love in the world? Be peace, be love, be the change that we want to see in the world, because life is a great experiment, and each one of us has a profound calling to be the love of the world, the light of the world. It's who you are, it's what you are. Are you ready to say yes to being that in the world?
Yes. Yes.
And so it is.